Hi, for my condition disorder, I chose autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum disorder is a neurological disorder characterized by repetitive and characteristic patterns of behavior and difficulties with social communication and interaction. According to Autism Support of West Shore, an estimated 1 out of 48 boys and 1 in 252 girls are diagnosed with autism in the United States, which I found shocking because I thought it would be the other way around, personally. Um, the DSM-5 criteria for autism spectrum disorder is deficits in social communication and social interaction. That can be abnormal social approach and an inability to hold a back and forth conversation, reduced sharing of interest, emotion, or affect, failure to begin or respond to a social interaction. It could be a child would have nonverbal communication behavioral issues for social interactions, such as a lack of eye contact and or body language, understanding the use of gestures and or lack of facial expression, developing, maintaining, or understanding relationship difficulties and adjusting behaviors in various social contexts. Restricted repetitive patterns of behaviors, interests, or activities. Repetitive motor motions, waving of the hands or the feet, the arms, use of objects or speech, insistence on sameness and flexibility in routines or ritualized patterns of verbal or nonverbal behavior. If any of you are working with children with autism, you know they very much like to have a very rigid schedule. They like things to be, well, I guess not all of them like that, but there's a lot of them out there that like to have a routine, and they do not like to deviate from that routine. Um, Fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focused. A child on the autism spectrum would maybe find themselves really interested in learning about animals, and that's the only thing they do. They read the books about animals. That's all they want to talk about. That's all they want to focus, and it's hard to get them to deviate from that subject. Hyper or hypo reactivity to sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. Um, they can be very uh, certain clothing they can be very sensitive to certain clothing. They may not necessarily like to wear jeans. They have certain things that they like. They're sensitive to different sounds or smells. They just have a lot of, sometimes it's pretty much a sensory overload for them sometimes. Symptoms, in order to be diagnosed through the DSM-5, symptoms must be present in the early developmental period, however, can be delayed until social demands exceed limited capacities, may be masked by learned strategies in later life. So, the symptoms of autism may show up earlier in life. Um, some kids may do really well up until, they're getting into school, and that's when they're going to start seeing some of those characteristics that fall under the criteria. And some may not find out that they're, have autism spectrum disorder until they're later in life, because that wasn't something that was available, the knowledge wasn't available when they were younger. Symptoms cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, and other important areas of current functioning, and these symptoms are not easily explained by intellectual disability. So autism spectrum disorder isn't explained, it doesn't have necessarily have anything to do with their intellectual learning. The video that I chose to present for this is the 10 Minutes with the Temple. Temple Grandin is a very strong spokeswoman for autism. Um, I I watched this video, and it's hard not to be in awe of how amazing she is and how much she really wants to see people who at one time diagnosed with Asperger's, now it's just the autism spectrum disorder. Um, she wants them to succeed, and talking and just giving as much information about what autism looks like, what it may look like for some and may not look like for others. In this video, she actually talks about pushing children on with the autism spectrum a little more, pushing them to do jobs, pushing them to maybe get away from the video games and do other things, because she is concerned that by a, by our society not necessarily doing that, that these beautiful minds that are being shown through the autism spectrum is losing out on being able to do jobs that um, people once could, that had potentially have been on the autism spectrum. She also talks about her anxiety level, and that there's nothing wrong with someone who has autism spectrum disorder that may need a little Prozac to help calm the anxiety and things like that. And I mean, this is just one of many videos that are out there that she speaks on things. There's several things she talks about. There's another video talking about sensory, sensory issues being on the autism spectrum and things like that. And I just find that she's a very fascinating lady, and uh, enjoy watching her videos. So I thought that that would be a good share. The article, this is the citation for the article that I chose, which was Building Capacity to Support Students with Autism Spectrum Disorder, a Modular Approach to Intervention. The article summary, it was a very interesting article to read. It talked about that while there are evidence that many interventions are available for teachers with children diagnosed with the disorder, autism disorder, it's kind of being founded that while, school psychologists and even the administrations of schools are aware of the diagnostic characteristics of autism spectrum disorder, they aren't necessarily educated on the evidence-based interventions available out there for those children. So I personally, in the job that I do, there are times that I've worked with parents who have children that have been on the spectrum, that has been put into a behavioral classroom due to behaviors, but still, even though these classrooms are built, they're not necessarily built, not necessarily given enough evidence-based interventions to assist those that are considered autistic, that are on the autistic spectrum disorder, which makes it harder for the teachers as well as for the children, the struggle, and the parents. So it becomes really difficult for them. The article suggests several different ways to implement these evidence-based practice interventions. Some of the recommendations that I didn't put on the summary were coaching, uh, collaboration teams, working together to select certain interventions, and then trying, to make sure that they are able to implement those interventions inside the schools. One of the things that we, of course, find with children on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, is that not every intervention works for every child. So the schools being aware of those interventions will also need to be aware that they have to be flexible and find the intervention that works for each child. Some national web resources that I provided, autismspeaks.org, autismsociety.org, autismsciencefoundation.org, and autismnetworkinternational.org. I thought those might be some very useful web resources out there. Also, make sure you look in the community that you live in and see what kind of support groups may be there for the families that you're working with. And these are my references. I referenced the article, of course, the DSM-5, and then the definition that I got, the autism spectrum definition, and the statistics at the beginning of the video. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you.